Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Modern Mom's Roadmap to Balance podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Nettleton, and today my guest is Dr. Zoe Rappaport. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with over 10 years of experience in New York City, specializing in women's health and empowerment, life transitions, and identity changes. She uses a woman-centered, collaborative approach to empower women in their personal and professional lives. As the founder of Zoe Rappaport Consulting, she also coaches women leaders, helping them enhance their communication skills and assertiveness in all areas of life. Dr. Zoe offers one-on-one sessions, group masterclasses, and soon-to-be released self-paced courses to support women in becoming confident, effective communicators. She brings a deep understanding of the unique challenges women face during all stages of motherhood and life stages, and how challenging finding balance truly is. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Zoe.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And with the question that I ask every guest, what is your definition of a balanced life?
That's a great question. I think it is different for most people, but it's going to involve some things you say yes to and some things you say no to, and curating what you commit yourself to. You cannot do
Ooh.
everything. So I think it's about, what are your goals? What do you enjoy? What do you have to do? And what do you need to do? And finding the
Mm.
balance between those three things.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that word curating, because for me, what comes up when I'm thinking of curate is you're intentionally choosing what it is that you want in your life and what you don't want in your life.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not random, it's not chance, it's not luck.
Mhm.
It should be active decisions on your part. I know we all have to do some things we don't really want to do, but that's where the balance comes in. Some things have to be
Mhm.
done and some things want to be done. So how do you balance that? And that involves being intentional with what you say yes to and what you say no to.
Yeah. And I know that in our talks before we hit the record button, I know that you work with people pleasers and perfectionists. Do you find that this is even more difficult for women who identify as a people pleaser or perfectionist?
Yeah, absolutely. Recovering people pleasers, as you might put it, or just people pleasers who are ready to put themselves in the mix, really have trouble saying no to anything because they're so focused on how other people feel that they lose track of
Mhm.
what they even want. You could see that not just with mothers, but women in general, like on dates, things like that. I'd have clients who talked about worrying about how they would come off to other people. And I'd say, well, what about you? Did you like this person?
Mhm.
And they hadn't even thought about it.
Oh my gosh.
So even more so with moms and your kids, since pretty much we're
Mhm.
hardwired to care so much, that they put the kids' needs first in terms of social, nutritional
Mhm.
activities, to the point that we can get really burnt out. And I'm guilty of it too. And I'm not a self-proclaimed people pleaser, but I am a mom, and it still takes conscious effort all the time to balance, because it's very
Mhm.
easy to kind of just go straight into what does everybody else need and go into
Yeah.
problem solving and fix it mode and forget you being present and focused on a balance.
Yeah. And I had actually recently read A Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control. And I highly
Hmm.
recommend that book for
Oh, I
anyone
love
who
it.
feels like they're a perfectionist. It is so good. And this is part of the reason why I started this podcast, not because of the book. I mean, we've been on for over a year now, but to highlight how everyone's definition of balance is different. And this idea of like all of the scales being balanced and even, that's not the reality, but us being able to choose what it is that we do want to balance in our life. Not that everything is going to be perfectly balanced and aligned in our life, especially in different seasons. And so this is kind of what came up for me as you were talking about that, and
Hmm.
especially with the curating and being intentional, and how as people pleasers, it can be really difficult to remember that, because that can drive you to want to make everything balanced, not just for yourself, but like your family and everyone in your life. And it's just not possible. You have to return back to
That's,
yourself.
I think that's such a good point. And I think also as therapists, we find ourselves trying to solve problems for other people all the time, people
Mhm.
pleasers and perfectionists too. And that further takes away from us focusing on our needs, on our wants, on our fulfill, lifestyle and balanced lifestyle. So remembering, right, that I'm not here to fix everyone's problems, especially when I'm not at work, right?
Yeah.
I can support and I can be there, but I don't actually have to find the solution to everything. So I
Mm.
love that, yeah, and the idea of that perfectionist guide to losing control, because perfectionists are trying to control every outcome, which you can't do. I imagine that's part of the book. I'm not sure,
Mhm.
but I feel like
Yes.
that's such an important piece to remember, that you can control what you bring into it, but you can't control how it's taken or what the outcome actually is.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm definitely going to look into that book. That's great.
Yeah, and for the listeners here, I'll definitely link it in the show notes. So if you want, you can find the link directly to Amazon.
Or
Finish
your
yourself
local
up.
library, which I love. I love my
Yes.
e-library.
Yes, your local library. That's funny. I didn't even bring that up because earlier I was on my library catalog looking for a book that I had found on Facebook. I think someone
Mhm.
recommended it. And so I was just on there trying to figure it out because I had never used their online portal to reserve a book. And so I was doing that earlier today.
So we are big fans. We also take out books for our kid and put it back. We buy the ones that we take out over and over again, but your local library is a great resource for everything.
Oh,
Yeah.
I,
Parenting books that you only want to read once.
oh, yeah. Or parenting books that you think you like, and then you're like, oh, well, actually, this is not for me.
Exactly. It's a great trial.
Yes. And I was not the greatest library person. I have a really hard time. We don't live that far from the library. Probably it's like a 5-minute drive. And I was really bad at returning the books. And
Oh,
then it
yeah.
would get so late and like, oh, well, I'm going to have to return these, but I want to do it in person. So I know that they're checking them in. And I'm like, oh, as I'm saying this out loud, I was like, oh, that's a bit of perfectionism coming out.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, oh, that's the perfectionist guide.
Because they have a drive through where you can just drop them in. So that was one time. So I had to pay a fine. And then the second time I tried recently, again, forever, it was probably like 6 months late
Mhm.
with my books. And part of it was because we had lost one. And then for some reason in my mind, I'm like, well, I want to return them all together, which is, come on, like, hello, Kayla, you don't have to return them all together. It's okay. And so for the first time ever, I renewed my books. They sent me a text message and they were like, choose one of these responses. And one of them was renew. And so I renewed them. So I feel really good about that.
They want it to be easy. And that's
Mhm.
the good thing about online books. Of course, they either automatically take them back or automatically renew. You cannot have a late return online.
That's true. Cause I just like pull them away
They just
automatically.
pull them away. Exactly.
Yeah. And all of these that I had were physical books. So that was definitely on me.
No, I'm not great at returning books on time either, to be honest. And it's about a 2-minute walk for me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't even have to get in the car.
So going back to our conversation,
Mhm.
one of the things in being able to balance our life or figure out that balance, how we want it to be, we have to be in communication with our people, whether that's our partners or our family members, however your family looks. You have to
Mhm.
be in communication. And when I was reading through some stuff, assertive communication came up in your application. And I know assertiveness is like a dirty word. It's almost like, ooh, that person doesn't always bring about confidence. When I'm thinking of assertiveness, I'm also thinking of someone who's confident, but that's not always a picture people picture, especially for women, right? Assertive man and an assertive woman, different images come up for people when they're thinking of
Yes,
the two.
absolutely. I write a lot about this in my blogs, and actually, this will be what my course and group program is heavily focused on. One of the main things I have found is that people equate assertiveness with aggressiveness for women,
Yes.
and it's not the same thing. They're completely different. So I actually made a little chart about different types of
Mhm.
communication, with passive on one side, assertive in the middle, and aggressive on the other. So you can really see the differences in a nice visual.
Ooh,
I'm a very visual person. I love tables and
yes,
graphs,
me
all that stuff.
too.
Um, so if you think of assertive, it's actually in the middle, and it's ideal because it basically just means you're being clear, direct, you're respecting my space, you're respecting your space, There's room for collaboration and feedback. But aggressiveness, it's basically a bully, honestly. An aggressive person talks over you. There's no room for input. There's no room for collaboration. It's direct, but also not necessarily even caring about being clear. It's very different. But as women, we are so heavily socialized and expected to be passive, permissive, submissive, that any little bit of assertiveness is met with resistance and like, whoa, calm down, like, why are
Yeah.
you upset? Or something's, but it's not. Picture a man saying the exact same thing. Would it be aggressive or would it be direct and clear and considered leadership style? So
Yeah.
trying to remember all that, how would someone else say it? Or even how do you want to say it? Remove the filler words, remove the maybe, would you, do you mind? Like all of that is not necessarily to be clear and assertive, but assertiveness is not aggressive. But I work with so many women who have not been assertive that any little bit of directness, even forget assertiveness, just being a little more direct feels aggressive. But it's just something completely outside your comfort zone. And you're worried about how people are going to react. A huge difference. It's not a dirty word. It's a really healthy way to be, I think.
Yeah. No, it really is. And
Yeah.
what have you found the most challenging for the clients that you work with in being able to practice and implement assertiveness, assertive communication?
Worrying and actually dealing with pushback from people, other people kind of challenging their direct speech or their direct communication or their wants or needs. And it's something that's actually to be expected when you're changing how you communicate. People
Mhm.
are going to be a little surprised. If you work with any therapist, in family systems, it works in any relational dynamic that someone does try to keep it at the status quo, and shifts are possible, but there's always a little like adjustment period and pushing back and people learning your new boundaries and being surprised by them. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But what I have helped people do is even say, hey, with a close friend or a family member, someone you're pretty comfortable with, because I also recommend starting with people you're comfortable with. I want to try some new ways of communicating. I want to be more direct. Can you support me in this? And they can even talk about the process, and that helps make it a little more doable, maybe less threatening to themselves and others, So a
Yeah.
big part is trying to predict the reaction. One of the most common things I hear is being afraid of like hurting other people's feelings or being seen as rude
Yeah.
from women. Those are big,
Mhm.
big ones I hear on repeat. I don't know if that resonates with you and your
No, yes,
audience,
it
but
does.
okay.
Yeah, I actually had like a specific client come into my mind because this is one of the things that they struggle with in terms of being more assertive. And when assertiveness is really about being more clear
Mhm.
about what it is that your needs are in your communication style. And that fear is there in terms of, I don't want this to come off a certain way, right? Or I don't want to be seen as aggressive. But
Mhm.
assertiveness and aggressive are two different things.
They really are two different things. And you got to ask, why are we so comfortable being passive? I
Mhm.
mean, that's not clear at all. People don't know what you're thinking. It leads to being passive aggressive because you've built up resentment and frustration and feeling like you're being ignored, dismissed, and stepped on. And
Yeah.
that also doesn't create authentic relationships. So being assertive is better at
Mhm.
work, it's better at home, it's better for balance because
Yeah.
sometimes we're not honest with ourselves either. So let's be assertive with ourselves too about what we do not like and what we really hate, and limit what we hate doing as much as possible. Obviously, you gotta have to make lunch every day and things like that, which is tedious, but maybe something that comes up too is at work, right? When people are being asked to stay late or do things past their working hours, or
Yeah.
do tasks that are not part of their job role, and they end up just taking it on and on and on, as opposed to setting a boundary and putting their phone on do not disturb if it's not 9 to 5. Those are their hours, and taking on every crisis, of their direct superior, things like that. At home, it might be spending too long with the in-laws. That's just overwhelming, as opposed to saying, here's my time limit. Can we try to work within it? Or taking space, or just communicating what you want and what you feel like
Mhm.
you really have a limit about. Because when you go past that limit, you're probably not that fun for anyone anymore. You're
Yeah.
not having fun. We don't hide it very well when we're
Yes.
annoyed and cranky. And
Yeah.
most people appreciate direct communication, even if
Mhm.
they have to get used to it a little bit.
Yes. And also, when you're communicating in that way, you can come to some sort of compromise or understanding. So
Hmm.
it's funny that you mentioned spending more time with your in laws, because in the beginning of the relationship between my husband and I, the family dynamics, like my parents and stuff, we would spend a lot of time together. My husband was not used to that. He did not have the
Hmm.
same family dynamics. For one, his mom didn't even live in the area. She lived in a different city in Texas. So that was one thing. And he didn't have the closest relationship with his dad. So he just wasn't used to spending a lot of time with family.
Yeah.
And I was totally opposite. We lived in the same area as my parents, and my grandparents live right next door in the same 5-acre property. So I
Oh,
was
wow.
so used to being around family. And when we would hang out, it would be for hours. This was
Yeah.
not just, we're going to go see grandma and grandpa for 30 minutes or an hour. It was, we're going to be there all day, especially if it was like a celebration. So, okay, I was exaggerating a little bit. We're not there all day from morning to evening. But if we would go over there for Christmas or Thanksgiving, we could be there from 5 or 6 to like 10 or 11. So that's
Yeah.
half the day, right? And so he was not used to that, but that was my expectation.
Right.
And so whenever we were there, and before he even brought this up as like a problem or an issue for him, or just that just wasn't his expectation, I would get upset because I'm like, why are we leaving? Like, why do you want to leave? Like, we've only been here for this long. But my expectation was like, oh, I'm used to this. He did not have an expectation. So it wasn't until I chatted about it with him, because for me the problem is I was enjoying my family, and I could understand that we didn't have to be there at like those times every time we went.
Right.
But for special holidays or celebrations, I ended up telling him like, hey, I want to be here for this time, and if you're okay with that, just let me know. If not, if you need, we can take separate vehicles. But we had to figure out like what was going on for both of us, because resentment could have really been infused in there if
Oh,
this
yeah.
was not something that either of us had paid attention to,
That comes
right?
out all the
And
time, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I would get annoyed that he'd want to leave early, and he was probably getting annoyed that I wanted to stay. So
Hmm.
yeah. And so I had to be assertive in what my needs were and being able to spend time with family. And only from there were we able to come up with compromises.
Right. Because then he could actually hear what your needs and expectations were and vocalize that his were different. Sometimes it's hard if you don't say what it is, you don't even know that they're different. He just knows he's hit this limit and it's done right now. And it's probably already been done. And he tried to stick it out and now he can't anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, like in my early days of being a mom, and we would go to my partner's family, honestly, I went up and took a couple naps because that's what I needed. And it might have been hard at first, but they were really open and welcoming about it. And I talked to him saying, hey, this is a hard time. I want you to see your family and the baby, but I'm just not feeling it. And they were like, go take a nap. And it was
Mm,
good, but if I hadn't said it and tried to stay awake or just
oh,
gone
yeah.
through it without speaking, I probably would have been super cranky, ruined it for everyone, and not want to go back again. Then it makes the next times even
Oh, yeah.
worse too. Where
Mm.
if it's different and everyone kind of understands that we can all spend more time with our own family than our partners can with our own
Oh,
family,
yes.
and vice versa, right?
Absolutely.
So knowing
Yeah.
that, okay, if I want to be there for a weekend or even like 6 hours, my partner's going to need a break, and that should be okay. But I think when there's no clear communication, we get nervous when our partner is dissociating or separating or like disconnecting from the moment, as opposed to, are you okay? As opposed to, I'm taking a mental break. And that's rewarding and really easy to accept if you have a secure communication line, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just going about what you said in terms of, we can usually spend more time with our family than our partner's family. Yes, there are cases where it's reverse, where we feel like we can
Absolutely.
spend so much more time with our partner's family than we do our own family. It just depends on the relationship.
Yes.
But my point here is, in order to have these conversations, we have to confront the issue with our
Hmm.
partners. And confrontation is also seen as a dirty word.
Right.
Confrontation and assertiveness. And they kind of go hand in hand, because when you're
Yeah.
going to confront someone with a specific issue or complaint, you want to be assertive in that communication so that you're clear and that there's no confusion of what it is you're trying to say, or you're trying to beat around the bush about something.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that was
absolutely. They really are similar. So you think of, okay, assertive communication, confrontation, and then I would ask you, okay, what if I said confident communication instead? Does that have the same feeling? Right? It sounds more
Mhm.
empowered. A confident discussion would involve confrontation and discuss back and forth, which is what a confrontation is. It doesn't have to be an aggressive one.
Yeah.
And what if I told you, they're the exact same things, and I could name a course, assertive communication or confident communication or leadership communication, and they'd actually all teach the exact same thing. So it's all, like you said, it's about perspective, about what words have been taught to mean to us. We're supposed to be afraid of being assertive or uncomfortable with it. And to be
Mhm.
quite frank, I think part of society depends on us being uncomfortable with it,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I'll tell you, actually, I was invited to speak at Yeshiva University in front of about 100 of their female scholars.
Mhm.
I was pretty nervous about it. And they found me because I wrote very openly about assertive communication. But when I
Wow.
was asked to speak, they asked me to change it to confident communication. Same programming, same
Insane.
information. They found me because they looked it up as assertiveness, and then felt softening it would bring more people in
Okay.
or invite more people to feel open, as opposed to,
Mm.
push them away with the term assertiveness. So I fully respect that people are open to receiving things in different ways, which is
Mhm.
also why it's important to know that direct communication doesn't mean harsh. It doesn't mean you can't find the right way to say something. It doesn't mean there's only
Yeah.
one way to say something. It doesn't have to be rude or anything like that. I love helping women find their voice, not my voice, because
Mm.
I'm more comfortable
I love
being
that.
kind of aggressively direct sometimes. Again, that's me. But
Yeah.
helping other people find how they're comfortable saying it, you can still be so much more direct than you're being in your own voice.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
usually involves actually removing some of your filler words. It's
Mhm.
actually usually pretty simple to get started. Removing those qualifiers of like, do you mind? Maybe if you thought, anything along those lines,
Oh, yeah.
um,
Yeah.
is
Or the
makes it
"I'm
a
just
passive.
emailing you," or "I'm
Yeah,
just wanting to know,"
right.
those filler words, yeah.
Exactly. Wondering if you thought this maybe would be a good idea. And meanwhile, you're saying all those words, you haven't even gotten to the point.
Oh, yeah.
People
Yes.
stop reading.
Uh-huh. No, they do. Or they'll, like, trying to skim, they're like, "What is she trying to say?" or "What are they trying to
Yeah.
say?"
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So actually something I like doing in my previous group workshops is I made a little worksheet where basically you're going to talk about the 3 points you want to get across and make bullet points. How do you want to say it? What are 3 different ways to say it? Take a look again. Can you
Mm.
remove 50% of the words?
Oh, yeah.
So it's a process, it's a learned
Wow.
skill. It's the
It
same
is.
point, but you can usually get it across more simply. Maybe
Mm.
that's another way to put it. Communicate simply.
Yeah.
A little more simply can really be more direct as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
And I also wanna highlight what you just said. This is a learned skill. This is something
yes,
that you can learn. This is not something that someone is just innately born with.
no,
We are innately born to follow our intuition, and we're oftentimes pushed to not think about it anymore or not pay attention to that anymore. But in terms of our communication styles, we're not, like, born with those things.
no. And as a mom of a toddler, he's about 3.5 now, I've
Mm.
seen the development. And growing up in the 80s, it was kind of different. There was not always this, like, what are you feeling? Let's bring it out. Like, what's going on? Let's do hot cocoa, calm breathing. We go on cocoa and like, it's so funny. And I see all these opportunities where someone could have squashed his
Mm.
curiosity and development, as opposed to trying to understand where he's coming from, recognizing where he is developmentally, and also learning to deal with tantrums and that he'll be okay. When you first start, you're like, I have to stop him crying. This is so bad.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard for you as a new mom to deal with your child being upset because maybe you don't trust they're going to be okay. And then as they get older, you have to say no to things because you
Yeah.
don't want them to eat ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you learn that they actually recover from disappointment and hearing no and having limits set. They're like, oh, maybe I could do this in the rest of my life
Oh,
too. And that people
yes.
may be upset, but they will be okay.
Mhm.
If your relationship is so sensitive that you think setting a limit will harm it, you definitely have to look at that relationship again.
Oh, absolutely. And that's when it comes to the limits and the boundaries. Like the boundaries are in terms of like what it is you're needing, and the limits is what it is you're willing to accept from other people.
Right. Yeah. It's also, I think, really important to note that your limits and boundaries can change over time, and that's okay. Like you said, with seasons, right? So in the past, I probably could have hung out with my family anytime, anywhere, whatever. And lately, I was finding myself being kind of really annoyed when they would come over on Sundays because I realized Sunday's just the worst freaking day for me and my family. And I'm recovering from a long week and the weekend where my son's not at school or didn't have daycare or whatever it is. I'm just like focused on how to get the house back together. What food do I need for lunch every week? Things like that. And I realized
Yeah.
that, you know what, Sunday's not the best day. So if we do hang out on Sunday, I need to keep it to 2 hours. But it wasn't until I also took a self-reflection look of why am I so irritated and agitated, you know? But those are cues for you that you might be hitting a limit you don't realize. It's a really
Yes.
good thing to reflect on. And that's why some of the journals have like, how am I feeling? What was my experience? What worked? What didn't
Mhm.
work? Those are things to help you learn innate self-reflection. I mean, like, oh, okay, I was rude and I was cranky and I was tired and I was stressed and I wonder why. And so that's
Yeah.
about being clear
Mhm.
with yourself too and communicating clearly with yourself, which journaling can help with a lot, I think.
Yes,
But more like less free
absolutely.
flow. I like the guided journaling a little bit more. Otherwise,
Mm.
I'm like, what did I do today? I like
Yeah,
thoughtful
yeah.
prompts to direct me in
Uh,
my reflection, I guess.
I definitely have in the past been more lent towards the prompt journaling, but
Hmm.
recently I've been more in a stage of free flowing journaling, but that
Hmm.
took some time to get used to because I used to be that person who would like have all these journals and then never wrote in them because I was like, oh,
Hmm.
well, I don't know, like I don't really have anything great to write about, or I don't have anything good to say, right? These journals are for you. They're,
Yes.
you it doesn't have to be perfect. So I had to let go of having it sound a certain way and just be able to free flow. And that took some time.
Yeah. Practice. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I can write a whole page. Sometimes it's just a few sentences. Sometimes I start with, okay, what was my dream last night? If I could remember it, then I'll start from there. And that helps. But I find that when it is that someone is struggling with the free flow journaling, it's because they're getting stuck in what exactly it is that's going to be written down
Hmm.
versus not having anything to write about.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah. My younger self, my 15 and 20-year-old self with my angsty poetry and dark stories who never had a shortage. And my adult self was like, "Oh, I couldn't think of as what I need to buy for groceries." And I think the direction helps me get out of my own head, actually.
Mm,
So I think that's part of it too. And it definitely, if I did it enough to integrate it and internalize it, maybe free flow would help. But it's like
mm,
meditation too, right? Like I like a guided, maybe even like body meditation, because that
mm,
helps me ground it and helps me push out the other thoughts that are just constantly my never ending to do with
mm.
two businesses and a kid and a home and a family. So some of that I think helps in terms of just relaxing my brain to focus on one thing at a time.
Yes.
But yeah,
And you created a journal, right? Talk a little bit
I
about that.
yes, okay. This is a new kind of passion project I created, and it's an empowerment journal. So
Mm,
it's 30 days of prompts for more empowered thinking and living. And again, I created it, but also because in a lot of my work, I give my clients prompts to journal on, and it helps them release a block, right?
yeah.
Sometimes those prompts help you release a block more quickly than if you had to find it yourself, right? So I've tried to do some of the most common ones I see. A lot of it is about celebrating your wins is an empowering process because we tend to only look at what went wrong for us that
Mhm.
day, that year, whatever. So focusing on wins, focusing a prompt on like what you're grateful for, a prompt on when you did something you were proud of, when you stood up for yourself, and then some prompts on what would you want to do differently next time. And then some affirmations in there about something along the lines of your voice deserves to be heard. You deserve to have a voice. You have value for no other reason than you exist. Things that we tend to wonder, does it matter if we say anything? Yes, it does. It matters if you say something. So it kind of has that flow of guiding you to certain ways of self-reflection. That's all journaling is. It's self-reflection, it's guidance, it's what you want to do. So yeah, I put together things that have really worked for clients, I think, to help through blocks. And I'm pretty excited about it. It's a free download, so I'm not gatekeeping or anything like that. I'm just excited
No, I
to
love that.
share it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also in terms like what you were saying about the blocks, a lot of the times it doesn't take a whole big thing to overcome blocks. Sometimes it's
Right.
just bringing it into awareness that this is a block for us that helps us to move through that block.
Especially if you're the kind of person who would even download a journal, you're ready to be guided, right? You're ready to do the work. So I think that's a big part of it too. Like this isn't going to work for someone who's focused on staying in the resistance. It's going to work for someone who's ready to come at it from the inside out, right? And then take action forward as well, right? And that's why this would go well with the empowerment calendar of 30 days of empowered living, where you could take a small action each day towards more empowered living, whether it's a day to reflect and realign, a day to say no more, a day to speak up about something you want. It doesn't have to be something you don't want. We don't even tell people what we want, right? It's not always about saying no. Sometimes it's about what do you want? You know, I don't know how many women you know that don't tell their partners what they'd like for their birthday and want them to guess and then get disappointed when they don't read their minds, right?
Yes.
Mind reading. Yeah, I call it mind reading. Recipe for disappointment. So what do you want to tell someone that you want today? Or even complimenting someone is actually an act of empowerment because you're speaking up. You know, oh, you like that person's dress? Oh, I love your dress. It looks great on you. End of empowerment action for today, right? Sometimes it's about just expressing yourself verbally and openly. So that goes well with the journal if you're ready to both reflect and then take action. I think it's a little combo. I hadn't thought of that till now, actually, why I created them literally at the same time.
Well, as you were saying that, I was like, oh, do these go together? Can they be done separately? But it sounds like it would almost improve the other's experience of doing what. Yeah,
because I just created it and haven't really talked about it until now. I didn't see that, oh, somewhere inside it made sense that they go together. Reflection and action, right? Reflection and action each day. You can reflect and then take a little action. So that's a great. So see, sometimes we know things inside and don't realize it till it's all visualized in front of us.
Yes. So when you're talking about the calendar, what comes to mind is like a challenge, right? This empowerment challenge to empower yourself.
Yes, exactly. When I say empowered living too, a real big part of it is just living more authentically, right? Authentic communication, authentic relationships, authentic work-life balance. It's like being authentic to yourself, because I really think most of us want to be more empowered inside.
Oh, yeah.
And that
Absolutely.
it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So if you can even change the word empowered to authentic, it's the same exact process. You can label it whatever you want. But it's about discovering what you truly want, how you want to communicate it, what are your limits, boundaries, and also desires. Like all of that is in balance together for a balanced life. You know, as moms, we really often just put away what we want. I think for the first year, my son really liked fruit. I don't think I ate a single fruit because I wanted to save it in case he felt like it.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean? And it's like, that's not even my innate nature, and it still happens, and it still takes of like, oh, I'm anemic and I'm not nourished in this way. Not like actually because I take vitamins, but like, oh wow, I always have 1,000 apples and I don't eat them because he eats 4 apples a day.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So I think that's important to recognize, even if you're so used to being empowered, there's different seasons and changes in your life that can make you forget.
And I think this is so important too, because oftentimes we're not aware how much we've kind of changed,
Yeah.
or not just changed, but we're so far removed from the person we were before motherhood
Mm-hmm.
that we might not even recognize ourselves. But even just like listening to this podcast can even spark things for you, like, oh, I used to love doing this. Why don't I do that anymore? I need to make more space for that. And how can I do
Right.
that? And when you're talking about the calendar and the journal, it really, I think, ties back into that. If you can do this, then you'll really be able to curate that balance that you want,
Mm-hmm.
even more authentically for yourself, because this will a learning process, like learning more about yourself and your needs and your wants.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that part of that is the idea behind 30-day challenges,
Mm,
because everyone says on this podcast and that book, it takes 30 days, so 33 days or something to establish a habit. And
mm,
that's why doing something small, 5 minutes a day, is more likely to establish a habit than doing something once a week, twice a week, or for 40 minutes twice a week, right? A
wow.
habit is created by consistency and repetition.
Mhm,
So that's part of it. Even if you only write one sentence a day, that's a starting
mhm,
point.
mhm.
And it
Yeah.
will usually flow to more, right? The initiation is always the hardest part. Once you start doing something, you're usually able to keep going. And then you might even have motivation to do something else you were avoiding, right? It's
Mhm.
like, what's the opposite of inertia, right? An object in motion stays in motion. There
Oh,
you go.
yes, yes. Yeah, but
High
the
school
heart,
physics here,
to
right?
me, it's funny because I was just thinking that as you were talking, in terms of it takes the most energy to start something than it
Yes,
does to continue it.
exactly, right? So start as small as you need to, and then
Mhm.
you'll be able to keep going. Same
Yeah.
with communication. The more you set a boundary, even a small boundary, the better you'll be able to expand that boundary. So that's something I'd love to share, how it's easier to add a habit onto an existing habit, right? Like
Yes.
if you're morning coffee and scroll on your phone, can you put in 2 minutes of journaling into that already existing routine as opposed
Mhm.
to trying to start a whole new routine? So adding it on might be more helpful, right? Just as a way, if you're really ready to start something. And again, if you're listening to podcasts, downloading journals, you're ready to start something.
Mhm.
So make it as easy as possible for you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I know that there was one more thing that you want to talk about in terms of the new group that you're starting in November,
Oh,
correct?
yes. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I've been doing one-to-one coaching for a while, and I've done a couple like 4-week workshops, but I really am excited to launch them. It's either a 3 or 6 month empowerment group.
Okay.
So working on all things assertiveness, all
Mm,
things empowerment, all things communication. And it's relevant to anyone, whether they're trying to improve their possibility of getting a promotion at work or a higher raise or setting boundaries at home. It really is all related, and it's
mm,
all the same skill set. Learning in one area will help you in another, and learning from someone who's working in one area will help you in another. So it's an opportunity. It'll be a combo of course plus weekly group coaching.
okay.
And I love group coaching. I'm in a coaching group myself, and I love it because you are indirectly coached all the time by everyone else
Yes,
sharing their feelings,
absolutely.
their thoughts, the mindset work that goes into it. It's a lot of mindset work. Learning how someone says something better. Honestly, you're probably thinking the exact same thing. So I love the group aspect of it, and I feel like I can help more people at a lower price point
Mm.
and save all of us some time and energy in trying to figure this out on our own.
Oh, yeah. I'm a huge, huge believer in the power of community and learning in
Yeah.
community, because you're getting more examples out of
Yeah.
the experience.
And honestly, you have built-in cheerleaders validating you, right? You're not
Mm,
alone in this. You're never alone in what you think. There's always someone who thinks the same thing, but you're not alone. You could be reminded over and over that you deserve these limits. Your happiness is just as important as someone else's happiness. Your comfort and safety is as important as someone else's feelings. So it's really such a supportive environment. And I've learned so much from my groups that I am just really excited to offer this now.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And if anyone's listening here, what is the best way to get in contact with you or to get into your world?
I'm usually on Facebook. That's probably the best way right now. But my website also has, you can email me, but I have a free Facebook group right now called Women Who Rise, Leadership and Mindset Strategy. And that's where I check in the most. And that's where I put all my trainings come there first. All my collaborations will come there first. And yeah, that's a totally free group. Just answer a few questions about, why you're here and you're in.
Awesome. And then I will definitely link that up in the show notes.
Thank you
But
so
thank you
much.
so much, Zoe, for giving us your time and hanging out with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.